So let's look a little closer at this sex-linked, what this means, specifically for us humans. Why is it that XX gives something completely different than XY? When we look at it visually, the X chromosome is much, much larger than the Y. Turns out the X chromosome carries a lot of genes on it. The Y it does have a lot of genes, just nowhere near the number of X chromosome. But what it does carry is one gene in particular that is very, very important. The gene known as the SRY gene. The SRY gene signals for a specific testosterone receptor. During fetal development, a few weeks in, just begin to, the SRY gene, I think it's about a month or so in, will be activated. The gene expression will be activated. Cells will start to express a receptor for testosterone. At this point, whether you're XX female or XY male, during this point in fetal development, you are making testosterone, different types of estrogens, and things like that. It's just, do you have the receptors at high enough concentration on the right cells for certain development? SRY gene in certain tissues in the fetal abdomen will be expressed. Testosterone will bind, and as we saw back previous chapters, different cell signaling pathways within the cell will be activated. New genes will begin to be expressed as a cell response. Certain one of these genes will call for those tissues that have a higher SRY receptor gene, that receptor will cause those tissues to begin to descend and then drop through the abdominal floor. They drop through the abdominal floor, and then over the next few weeks, those tissues will develop into testes. If there's no Y chromosome present, there's no SRY gene, even though there might be some testosterone floating around that's required for fetal development, those tissues will not get the signal to drop. Those signals will stay in the abdomen of the fetal abdomen, and over the next few weeks, they will receive the signal to begin to develop as gametic tissues, and those gametic tissues will then form the ovaries. So it turns out, fetally, the same tissue can go one of two ways. SRY gene present, and it's expressing the receptors, those tissues will drop, become testes. No SRY gene present, tissues stay in the abdomen, will become ovaries. And when you look at it, I'm sure there's a joke that can be made, a crude joke about size and things like that, women being better men, blah, 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 but you see here the X and the Y. As I mentioned in the last lecture when discussing Morgan's work with the fruit flies, the red eye versus white eye experiment, I mentioned that the XXXY male-female is not universal throughout the entire animal kingdom. There are exceptions. Certain insects, as you can see here, have what is known as the XO or the haplodiploid system. The XO egg still must be fertilized, male, female, but if the sperm that's fertilizing the egg does not carry a sex chromosome, those fertilized eggs will develop as male, which means when they go to produce sperm, they'll be producing half the sperm will have an X chromosome, the other half will have nothing. No sex chromosome. So that way, again, you get the 50-50 male-female. This is different than the haploid-diploid because here If the egg gets fertilized, it becomes a female. If the egg does not get fertilized, it will still develop and it will become a haploid male. Then you have what you see in some birds, what's referred to as the ZW. It's the opposite of our XXXY. Heterozygous female, homozygous male, whereas we're the different. Heterozygous is male for us, where the homozygous is female. What Morgan found with the red-eyed versus white-eyed is what we now refer to as sex-linked genes. Turns out that gene W is sex-linked. It is carried on either the X or the Y. In us humans, XX versus XY, whenever, predominantly the most part, I don't want to say whenever and always, but for the most part, when we're discussing a sex-linked gene, we're discussing something carried on the X. Part of the reason for that is if there's a mutation on the Y, it's generally going to affect fetal development, and the male fetus is either going to die in the uterus, in utero, or it's going to develop, but it's going to be sterile, or he will be sterile. If we're talking human males versus, one of the other mammals. When it comes phenotypically, sex-linked abnormalities, sex-linked mutations, are going to give a phenotype that is going to be more predominant in males versus females. Talked about this the last chapter, the last lecture of chapter 12. And you can see here again, shown in Punnett squares, that since we males only have one X, whatever's on that one X is all we have to utilize. Females, since they're XX, diploid for the sex chromosome, it's now going to matter for that gene, for that mutation, whether or not they are homozygous versus heterozygous. They're heterozygous, then there's a chance that they have at least one wild type allele that can mask the mutant phenotype, or the mutant allele, giving them a wild type phenotype. For us males, we don't have that. We see this in some, I keep wanting to say many, we see this in some sex-linked recessive disorders. Things that we have traced back to the X chromosome. Color blindness. Color blindness, yes, there are male and female people who suffer from color blindness, but this is something you're going to see of those numbers of people that do have color blindness or suffer from some form of it. It's going to be predominantly male. Same with certain types of muscular dystrophy and hemophilia. Can it happen in females? Yes, but it's predominantly males because we only have one X, whereas females, as I've said a few times already this lecture, are diploid at the X, so there's a chance that they will be, heterogeneous with at least one wild type phenotype. For females, they have to be homozygous. They have to be homozygous recessive for that mutant phenotype at both, for it to affect. An interesting side note that the textbook and most textbooks will bring up at this point in time is the fact that by being diploid at the X chromosome has within it a lot, primarily, is going to be genes that are required for fetal development, genes that are going to regulate sexual development, and things like that. By being diploid there for females, that could cause some issues. The gene products are going to be threshold-based signaling. Too much of certain gene products, is not good. It could have, even worse effects than not having the gene products. To compensate for this, we mammals have developed what is referred to as bar bodies. Since having diploid X's could be bad, especially if both X's are being used for gene expression, what happens during, forget what stage of fetal development, one of the X's will shut down. It will condense down so that whatever genes are present there on that X are no longer accessible. They call that, like I said, a bar body. Doesn't mean both X's are going to condense and shut off, just one. That way there's only one that can be used as a blueprint for development, for continued, maturation process. What's interesting is that there are still genes that are, they're going to have different alleles on the X chromosomes. One of them that we've noticed and we've studied a lot is for fur color in cats. And you look at a cat, you can get the calicos, patches of different color all over the body. Turns out there's one gene, two alleles carried on the X. One allele is for orange fur, the other is for black fur. So if you have a developing fetal cat that is heterozygous, has both the orange allele and the black allele, each on different X chromosomes, it's a 50-50 coin toss. In every fetal cell, which X will become the bar body? In some cells, it will be the X carrying the allele for orange. In others, it's going to be the X carrying the allele for black. So what you see on the calico cat, the orange patch are all derived from the cell that had the X chromosome carrying the black fur that turned to the bar body. So the only thing present is the orange allele. Black, it's the opposite. And it just keeps, all throughout the body. Interesting side note.